Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Today I have a wonderful guest coming on, Suhey Gomez. She's going to be participating in a conversation with me regarding suffering, how to suffer more, how to quit quitting. This is a good episode. We give you some problems. We point out the problems, but we also give you some solutions and fixes. Stay tuned as you enter mid-conversation. Peace and blessings.
It keeps coming up for me with this, like even quitting or going through as a book talks about, loving the suck, accepting that the suffering is there. And I've shared this with you before, and it's just a practical way of, I keep seeing it in my headspace, where I always remember my professor telling me when I had to run that 5K, it's like, how do you that those inner thoughts, how do you keep going in that moment? And something that really stood out while you were talking was the word or the concept of mindfulness. And I know in the book it talks about it too, and also in class and just my experience, it's not something, you try not to use the word mindfulness with athletes or performers, because sometimes it can have maybe not the best take on it, or the preconception about it. It's like, what? I'm going to sit still and listen to my thoughts. Really. But one of the parts that talks in the book too, on that chapter of suffering is, and came up while you were talking, is acceptance, accepting that in this moment, this is what I'm dealing with. And you might say like, oh, how do you do that? And it goes back to connecting to those inner thoughts. And I remember my professor specifically telling me when I was running the 5K, he's like, well, okay, you're in it, you're running, you're doing your run, you're in the midst of the suffering. What are you going to do? And I stood there like listening, what am I going to do? And his thing was simply accepting and telling yourself like, hey, this is life right now. This is what it is. And continuously bringing that repetition in our headspace to be able to begin to accept that. Of course, it doesn't always happen like immediately, but the more, as it talks about in the book, the more you have that rhythmic repetition in your mind, the more you're able to, in essence, kind of dwell into that and start accepting it. And also even telling myself like, this is temporary. This is what it is. I'm not going to quit. I committed to this. And going back to some of our conversations, the whole not quitting, I prepared, I committed to this, I'm going to follow through. So that's one thing that came up when we were talking about quitting and that suffering and how to try to deal with it best in the moment. And I think also connects to self-awareness. Unless you know that you're feeling this way, you're able to see what you can do. A lot of times you said, I think we kind of go on autopilot and just go cruise control and just doing it, but are you really doing it? Are you really trying your best? And how can you be more here in the now to be able to know like, all right, I'm going to accept this suffering. I'm going to keep going because I committed to this.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Lessons on suffering. And that's a two-part thing. Can you suffer through workouts? Can you suffer through the tediousness of what you're trying to do? Can you suffer through boredom? And then on a deeper level, how to quit quitting, whether it's stopping something altogether or quitting during a workout. So there's mental quits. Have you mentally thrown in the towel? Have you ever just mentally gone on the coast mode? And this is notorious for football athletes. If you're the fastest player on the field, at no time should an offensive and defensive lineman be beating you in wind sprints or gassers. Gassers is something you run from sideline to sideline and back. You might go down and back twice. So if you're that fast athlete, that's what I'm talking about. You're quitting on yourself. You're throwing in the towel, or you're going on coast mode. Now, speaking of football, we're like 4-5 weeks in. Some states, they're 6 or 7 weeks in. Going back to January, if you were throwing in the towel, or going back to August and July, if you're throwing in the towel in workouts, if you were in coast mode, you're paying for it now. So the question is, have you ever eased up in practice? Have you ever eased up in training? Have you ever stopped trying? Have you ever reduced your effort knowing that you have the physical capacity to go further? Why does this happen? Where does it come from? These are some of the things that we're going to be discussing today. Have you ever been in an argument, and have you ever been in an argument in your head, questioning yourself, having a debate with 5 or 6 different voices in your head. Why did I do this? How could this happen? I'm never freaking doing this again. Why did I let this person talk to me? Oh, this freaking sucks. That's what we're going to be talking about today. By the end of this, you're going to be able to perform a self-audit on your quitting. If you're first time listening to the show, this is Deshaun Fauntleroy. I have my wonderful guest, Suhey Gomez, coming on. She will have a doctorate in sports psychology pretty soon. Suhey, go ahead and introduce yourself right quick. Tell the people of the Sports Mastery audience what you're up to. You just had a move. Talk to us.
Yes. Yes. My name is Suhey, and I did just have a move. So I am currently a master's and doctorate student at John F. Kennedy University. I literally just moved to the Bay Area to start my doctorate classes. I actually start tomorrow, and I am specializing in sports psychology and using that more as life skills. So I'm going to be digging deeper into clinical work, so be able to do not only the enhancement performance part with working with athletes or performers, or really any individual, but also looking to work on the clinical part with athletes and performers. So lots going on my plate, but really exciting events that are happening, specifically starting class tomorrow. I just have about 37 new friends, 37 new classmates. So it's a little overwhelming, but that is the truth of my life, in fact, right now.
Yeah, when I hear the word clinical, I think of pathological sometimes, and then, on every team, you always have a few players that have their antics and you tease those guys. So, I'm gonna mess with y'all right now. Do you have a pathology when it comes to a new training routine? Do you have a pathology when it comes to team conditioning? What about personal conditioning? When those wind sprints come, are you getting sick? Do you need to go see the trainer? Do you need to go get your butt rubbed, your hamstring stretched out? We got some real characters that give up on the team, and in practice, when we need you to be up to par and on par when it comes to the conditioning, because late in the fourth quarter, and I'm sure there's some teams that have given up or lost games because certain players were not conditioned. And when that time came, they didn't want to go through the temporary suffering. And that's the beautiful part about this. When you're in situations of boredom or tediousness, when you feel like it's not going in, a practice is only 2 hours, 2.5, maybe 3 at the most. If you're talking about meeting, from the time the first meeting starts to the time those sprints are over. So y'all have to remember that a certain part of suffering, it's really just temporary. Speak to us on the temporary part of this, Suhey.
Yeah, I think definitely I agree that suffering, or when you're in the challenge of those sprints, or literally sitting in the sideline like, oh, here we go, the usual sprints. I think I feel like a lot of it's just kind of that staple or stamping that the concept or theme or affirmations or inner thoughts of knowing that this is just temporary and this is just now. Knowing that if you're just, I know it sounds kind of cliche to say, but if you're here in the now, knowing that this is only 5 minutes of my life or 3 minutes of my life, and continuing to accept that space of temporary, and knowing that you have, even going a little backwards, a little bit further deeper, is knowing that you've accepted this challenges from day one, and coming back to that passion of why you're doing that. And also, as we know in the book, it talks about repetition. So the more you're able to put yourself in those suffering situations, the more your threshold increases, the more you're able to really accept that suffering. So you want to get better at saying, okay, this is only temporary and I'm okay with this, bring it, then get yourself in those situations more and more. The more there's repetition, the more the consistency, the more you're able to work with it and be able to prepare for it and be okay with the temporary suffering in that moment.
Yeah, because I think what's important right now, as far as listening to you, and if you're listening, you have to think about what you think about. And when you listen to Suhey, It's like we know we're going to get into a tough moment. You know you're going to have conditioning. You know you might have a long period, which could be 15, 20, 30 minutes in a particular practice session, doing something that you don't necessarily like, doing something that challenges you, doing something that you're weak at, or doing something that you're not good at. So you have to be able to, one, get out of your comfort zone. And we talked about this on several occasions, but more importantly, do the best you can right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just take it minute by minute, rep by rep, because it's easy to go into those dark thoughts. And, and we talked about those dark thoughts before, but some of them are like, how can I get out of this? Why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why did I decide to do this? And I know for some of you new athletes, why am I playing football? This freaking sucks. I don't want to hit anybody, and I don't want anybody hitting me. But if you're in a body type, you've been doing martial arts, you've been doing wrestling, sometimes it just takes giving yourself a chance to learn the subtle nuances of a game and keep going through with it, from a sporting standpoint. And 9 times out of 10, one sport is going to help you for the other sport that you really play or your primary sport. But, we got to get out of those thoughts like when it's time to conditioning, I need to see the athletic trainer. I need to get my ankle rubbed. I need to get my butt rubbed, my quad. It's always something with certain people. And coaches, if you're listening to this, play this episode to those kids. Play this episode to your whole team, because to win that championship, we need everybody on deck. We need everybody thinking the right thought. We need everybody thinking championship thoughts. And the championship thoughts comes back to doing the necessary things on a day-to-day basis. It's all the small things, ladies and gentlemen, that leads to championships. What you do day in and day out. Can you master the fundamentals day in and day out? And sometimes when you're new, the fundamentals are quite simple. But then once you get conditioned, you really feel like you know what you're doing, it becomes boring and tedious. But there's a reason why we still do certain things. Because, Suhei, in the athletic world, especially football, we have what's called EDDs, everyday drills. So there's a reason why you have everyday drills. It's the same in the classroom. Everyday drills. You have to study. You have to read. You have to be there, first of all, and sit up front and pay attention. So share with us some of your dark thoughts when you wanted to quit.
Absolutely. Before I share my dark thoughts, and before I forget, I had a thought while you were talking. I'm going to input this here. You were talking about little parts, being able to, as literally connected to me was something with the book about segmentation and strategies that help you cope during the suffering. And you might say, what's the word segmentation? And we're talking about how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So when you were talking about parts, this reminded me of when there's a big task or there's a sprint or something you're about to work on during practice or a big game day, like how do you work through that? And going a little bit, rewinding that, looking at by little parts, being able to break those parts apart. Your mind works best when you're looking at segments of a goal or a routine, as opposed to, I have to run a 10K tomorrow, or I don't know, a month from now, looking at running maybe 2 every week and building to that 10. And I know it sounds really easy, kind of easier than done, but if you really are able to see that your mind works best when you're breaking parts of a goal, it helps you really compound overall at the end. So I wanted to add that when it came to building on the parts, that's a way to cope with suffering or help you go through that temporary suffering, as opposed to trying to deal with it all at once. Start looking at breaking it apart, or as in this saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So I wanted to add that. But some of you said my dark thoughts, right? Or when I was about to quit, what were my thoughts?
Yes. Just sharing a personal experience with us, if you don't mind.
Okay. No, I don't. Let's see. I guess I'll go, personal experience with where I'm at right now. I think it was probably 2 months ago, I had no idea where I was going to live. And I was, excuse my language, shitting bricks. I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, where am I going to live? I've been planning this for a year and a half. This is really like, I was going on crash mode. I was thinking everything possible and the negative side of the world of I'm not going to be able to find a place. Like, where am I going to go? There was a lot of doubt. There was a lot of course, fear, a lot of unknown. And I think for a lot of us, and I speak for myself, the unknown can be quite the frightful thing, knowing, especially our mind, the way it wants to know, make meaning of things, wants to know what's next. So, but so those were some of my thoughts. And I asked myself, like, okay, how did I work through that? And it might sound, yeah, I mean, for me, it worked like just trusting the process, as cliche as that sounds, and knowing that, as I call, leaning in. What I mean by leaning in, by doing things, not just sitting and hoping that everything just turns out, but really doing the work and stepping forward and just trusting that everything will fall in its place by leaning in, by seeking out the right people, by gathering data, by making calls, by seeking out the help that I need in order to come to a solution. But yeah, I would say every thought you can think of, I was definitely freaking out when it came to my new home, especially the expense out here. It's quite pricey. I was like, great, I'm going to be a poor student. Here we go. Cheerios and top ramen. No.
Top ramen.
But I ended up working out great. I appreciate my place, but not sure if that answers your question, but that was a definite freak out just like 2 months ago. But here I am.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, none of us are perfect. I've had hard days. I've quit personal projects. I've quit working with other people. Maybe there was a disagreement, but for me, there's nothing wrong with failure. There's nothing wrong with figuring out if something really doesn't work for you, then stop doing it, especially if it's causing you some kind of pain or anguish.
Right.
You don't want to be on a team if you can't get absolutely anything out of it. And if you really hate being there, then that sport is not for you. But I'm really talking to the folks that they know that they're athletes. They know that they want to be there. And for some reason or another, they've been taught somewhere along the way to find the easy way out, or to avoid hardship, or to avoid hard work. So those are the folks that I'm talking to. If you say you want to aspire to be an elite level athlete, you're going to have to deal with your dark thoughts. We all go through it. Some days we just don't want to be there. There's been days I didn't want to podcast. There's been days I didn't want to edit. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to edit today. So when you don't hear from me for 2 or 3 weeks, I am coaching 2 teams. So I get an outlet every now and then. I just need a break. And then I have to learn, okay, how can we optimize this where I can get this done and we be on time, as far as releasing the show every Tuesday or getting it out on the Thursday, so it's about you have to keep going. And then if you can just keep going, something good is going to happen. If you just keep showing up, I can promise you. Before we close out, I wanted to go through this. How do we audit quitting? How do we audit suffering? And because it goes back to, we got to think about the things that we think about in terms of looking into the future. I know if I go do this activity, this 5K, we got to run 10 gassers on Tuesdays because that's the conditioning day. And I know what I'm going to feel like, but how do I talk to myself in a positive and constructive way and get through it with positivity and not, because, what generally comes out is nonverbal communication. If we don't like something, it's going to show. If we hate something, it's going to show. So you shouldn't hate doing the things that you're supposed to love, if that makes sense, to make you a better athlete, to make you better at whatever particular sport that you play. So, when it comes to auditing quitting, when was the last time you quit something? How did it go down? What happened? What day was it on? How were you feeling? What were you doing in practices? How were the coaches talking to you? I need you to write that down first. The second thing I need you to do is rate your feelings of discomfort on a scale of 1 to 10. You have to be honest with yourself. And that leads to number 3. What was the official reason why you quit the practice session? What was the original reason why you didn't want to run? Why did you go to the trainer when you knew you should have been conditioning? Then you have to hear it from your coach. Number 4, what were your dark thoughts? What were you really thinking? You know, there's been times where I've been on football teams. Oh, I hate this effing blah, blah, blah. I don't want to freaking do this today. I want to hear those thoughts. What were your dark thoughts? And then number 5, and I've told y'all this before, some quits or lack of suffering is legit. You have a reason to stop. You have a reason to quit. You have a reason to not go on. And some of that is you could be in real pain or nursing a real injury. I'm not telling you to go on if you just sprained your ankle in practice or if you just pulled a hamstring. We know that you have to pull up on that and you have to go get some medical attention from your training staff or go see a physical therapist. So then there's a legit quit and then there's a shit quit. So you have to be honest. The times you quit, was it legit or was it a shit quit? And for me, and I'll just be personal, things that I've done in the past, whether it was on a team when it came to conditioning or not getting that last rep in or trying to get out of something, they've all been shit quits, you know, even as an adult. But I can look back on that and say, hey, when I encounter this situation again, or this person in a group, or these type of people in my group, when we're working as a team to go further on a project, I can see into the future as far as particular behaviors versus my dark thoughts and how another individual might be thinking, especially if I'm dealing with eccentric individuals. So I can get the task done and everybody can benefit versus starting a project and then nothing gets done. And we wasted several days, hours, weeks, months, and sometimes years. So, Suhei, on the audit of quitting, what is your thoughts on that? And can you help us a little bit further?
Yeah, I think goes back to some of the talks that we've had. Really, the audit part and really putting your thoughts into paper, which the audit of quitting, I see just as I'm really a visual person, and imagery is quite home for me. So I was listening to you and I can see the sheet like being written down from like, you or myself with an athlete or a performer. And I think the beauty of going through those steps, it reminds me to like the self-talk log or the suffering sheet where you're writing on the left side of the column, like the 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5. And then, okay, great. We have that. Now what do we do with that? And as I said before in some of our talks, it's tailored to the individual, right? To the client, to the performer, or to the athlete, because there's not one size fits all. But on the other side, looking at possibly like one option is, okay, what can we do? Shifting it, what can we do better for next time? There is definitely a power in writing things down. Sometimes athletes like, oh, I gotta write things down. Okay, if they don't want to do that, well, maybe we can do a voice memo. But there is a beauty in sitting down and taking the deliberate time to sit down and look at those thoughts. Because really what we're doing is the things that are in our head, we're putting them in a space, a platform to be able to digest or be able to look at and spread and expand from in order for awareness to really come about and be able to make change and modifications. So I think the challenge can be like, okay, is the athlete or performer really wanting to sit and do this, and really being able to hopefully have them buy in to like, yeah, there is work in this and there is beauty in this, and sitting down and going through your audit of what happened previously in order to get to the next level of seeing where I can do better, reframe, or be able to create something, whether it be affirmations or better inner thoughts or better steps or building some confidence, because there's so much you can do in those 5 steps or 6 steps that you shared. It just depends on where the athlete is. And that's the art of the science, right? Being able to go through a strategy or a talk, but then be able to add more to be able to have skills or techniques to move forward.
That's right. So coaches, parents, if you're listening to this, go back. And as we went through the self-auditing process, the quit audit, how to audit your quitting, help the athlete, work through it with your son or daughter. Coaches, work through it with your athletes, because this is what's going to bring the assignment to life. This is where you're going to learn some things about your student athletes or your kids that you probably didn't know before, that's going to enlighten you to go further. So that's what I want to encourage y'all to do. And lastly, if you're a football athlete, you're a volleyball athlete right now, you're a soccer athlete in season, I don't care if you're on a championship run, you're in the middle of the pack, or you're at the bottom of the cellar this season. Hey, let's finish these last 4 or 5 weeks strong. Let's handle your business. Let's turn it around for these last 4 or 5 weeks. Let's figure out how you can suffer. I know some of y'all, you're in regions where it's starting to get cold. You got to deal with the elements. So wrap your thoughts around that. Think about what you need to think about at the end of the practice. It's starting to get dark. It's temperature probably done dropped 10 degrees or 15 degrees since 9 o'clock in the morning. What are you going to do? If you think you could play at the next level, it's going to be like that in Green Bay. It's going to be like that, playing with the Patriots. So that is it.